We have one last storyteller for you tonight. Bill McGrath has had a couple of opportunities to leave Vermont, and he took the first one when he was younger. That landed him in New York, but obviously he did come back. More recently, he had the chance to move the manufacturing company he leads from here in Randolph to another state. The decision about whether or not to go affected not just him, but about 60 people who work for the company. In the end, Bill decided to keep his company here. It was a choice that had both an upside and a downside. Please welcome Bill McGrath.
My parents were raised in New York. So despite being born and raised here in Vermont, according to the real Vermonter rules, the best I can hope to achieve is the status of flatlander once removed. My mother had a cousin in Barnard, and her and my dad used to come up and visit them quite a bit when they first got married. Eventually, they decided to have a family here in Vermont. They moved to Underhill, Vermont, and I came along. They gave me a chance to get a start in Vermont, but would I stay in Vermont or to leave and go to the city? I loved electricity as far back as I can remember, getting yelled at for turning the light switch on and off, on and off. I loved electronics, and I would take things apart to see how they worked. I was fascinated by radio and television and the miracle of wireless communication. How did this little box, attached to nothing, play music and information and entertainment? How did this TV screen, only plugged into the wall, show these pictures from all over the world, including Sesame Street? I asked my mom where these signals came from, and she pointed out in our backyard to the towers up there on Mount Mansfield, which we could clearly see. I thought everybody could see the towers from their backyard. After high school, I went to the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut. I was immersed in city life. I wanted to learn electronics, but that first year was all English and math and history. I got bored and tapped into an antenna in my dormitory building and created a TV station for all the residents that lived there. We played movies at night, we had a bulletin board during the day, and of course featured the college's radio station, which of course I was heavily involved with. It was fun, more fun than going to class. A girl in my dorm told her father about my television station invention, and since he worked for a major television network in New York City, he offered me a job. Next thing I know, I was on the set of a major evening newscast, keeping all those little monitors behind the anchor working and showing things that were appropriate. Forget college, I found a different way to have a career. One day, when I came to visit my parents, I was thinking about how in New York I was living in a very expensive tiny room, and how this was a very big space, and it looked a little different than I remembered when I left it. It looked pretty nice. And so I thought, okay, let me look for a job in Vermont. And even though the pay was going to be a lot less, my quality of life would be better. I got a job at a local TV station in Burlington. And all of a sudden I was driving and snowmobiling and riding a snowcat up to those same towers I'd seen as a child. I loved that job. I became an amateur radio operator, a volunteer firefighter, an EMT. But I kind of felt like something was missing, like I didn't have that college degree, and I could see how that would eventually impair my career path. So I heard about VTC having this new 4-year degree program and decided to quit it all and go there as a non-traditional student, they call me. With an adult mind, I engaged in my classes. I was able to still get good grades while doing the fun things like college radio stations and building electric cars and other clubs. I was an RA and became a residence director. I started teaching classes while I was still enrolled. And I got elected as a student representative for the Vermont State College Board of Trustees. So I was simultaneously a student, staff member, faculty member, and a trustee on the board. Kind of like taking the cover off an ant jar. I could see everybody's plight, and it was really clear to me why they were all frustrated with high tuitions and low pay and not enough support from our state for higher education. I tried to improve things the best I could. And I thought I might just teach there at the college for the rest of my life. It seemed like summers off, right? Work through the winters. Well, some fellows were starting a company to address a new emerging technology. Light-emitting diodes had just crossed this big barrier where the blue LED was invented, and that, of course, gave way to the white LED. And I instantly knew that this is possibly going to replace all forms of conventional lighting with a lot more energy-efficient choices. I knew some great minds from VTC, and so I was able to get them to join me and form a company called LED Dynamics right here in Randolph. We grew in spurts, and we had setbacks, as companies do. Eventually, we outgrew our space, and we had to make a decision. New York was offering us 10 free years of rent if we would relocate there. New Hampshire had low minimum wage, tax incentives, and plenty of space. And even our advisors were saying that either one of those locations would offer us more opportunities because we'd be close to established tech centers. If we were going to stay in Vermont, we'd have to have a new facility because there wasn't anything existing around that would meet our needs. And that's an expensive proposition to build in Vermont. So I contacted the state with my plight and said, I can't make this financially justifiable to stay in Vermont, but I really want to try. And they responded. And we were able to get just enough help to be able to build our factory, which opened in June here in Randolph, keeping those jobs here. So now I'm able to make a living, create meaningful jobs, environmentally friendly products right here in Randolph. And it's just a great thing to do. But also, if I want to go to the city, 3 hours, I can be in Montreal or Boston, right? I get to hike, I can camp, I can snowmobile, and I can even go see a mountain in my backyard. So Vermont's the place for me. Thank you.
So as you said, your company, LED Dynamics, started in a farmhouse over the hill in Rochester,
Yes,
and moved to Randolph. You've had these opportunities to go other places, thought about moving out of state. Can you go a little deeper into the pros and cons that you weighed in making that decision to stay here? Because it's not one that comes easy.
Yeah, and the story remains to be told about whether that was a good idea or not. But certainly, I'm very happy about the opportunity to give that a try. And we certainly had, a lot of times in the history of the company, especially starting in a little farmhouse in Rochester, been told, why aren't you in Silicon Valley or Boston or someplace where this is expected? But we continued to surprise people. We were one of the first ones to create patents for this technology. We were constantly innovating, and we even made some of the big players really mad because they were like, these guys are in, a muddy parking lot in Vermont, and they're out innovating you. So that's kind of what we did.
Do you like being the leader of a company? Do you like running a company? I mean, it's a far cry from tinkering in your bedroom.
I like to think that there's a whole team behind me, and I'm just lucky enough that there's enough of a team that I'm able to be the spokesperson sometime. But
I don't know if that means you like it or not.
yeah, carefully worded.
We often hear about tech companies really struggling to find good employees, and that's something that in Vermont especially is an issue that lawmakers talk about, governors, successive governors have talked about, how to sort of get schools to work to the skills that employers need, not necessarily have children and young people coming up into skills that then there are no jobs for. Do you have trouble finding the employees you need here?
Well, first of all, we have a great local base to pull from for workers, but the best trick in the book is that we have VTC as the wellspring to be able to bring even more great minds. And some of the folks on my team go back up there to teach, and then when we figure out, who the best folks are, we might skim them off the top. So, but it's hopefully what came out in my story was that not just the company, but my love for the college and the opportunity it presented. I mean, I had been out there. And when I got there, I just realized this is what I was meant to be. And I still feel very strongly that connection is what's going to empower us to continue to have a good stream of folks coming in with great jobs. The hardest part is honestly that other folks that have tasted VTC graduates they get addicted quickly, and we have to compete with them. So.
You mentioned that you were a sort of non-traditional student. You were older
Yes,
than
I heard
some
that
of the other
term.
students. Yeah. That's an intimidating thing for a lot of people who either didn't get a degree or would like to get a different kind of degree or see a path to a different career, but that goes through a college setting, and that can be daunting in many ways. Do you have advice for other adults who are, trying to pursue this path and thinking college might be the way to go?
Yeah, get over it. I mean, higher education is everything. I mean, if you can possibly take advantage of it. I mean, it didn't really occur to me until I suddenly was there and realized, wait, I'm a few years older than these folks, and the admissions guy called me a non-traditional student. I said, well, what does that mean? But okay, I'll wear it. And instead, I ended up being, in a lot of ways, a role model for those folks, which really made up for my earlier forget college statement.
I suppose it doesn't mean that you're not allowed to play beer pong, though, even if you're
Oh,
slightly
no.
older.
In fact, we're the only ones legally allowed to play.
A lot of volunteer fire departments and emergency rescue squads are really struggling to fill their ranks right now. And there's a lot of conversation about whether and how to, quote unquote, professionalize the ranks, or how to make sure that there are emergency services in small communities. And that's happening around the state. I mean, how do we fix that problem?
Well, this kind of ties into another slide I think I saw during the show, before the show here, where, we want childcare folks to be professionals. We want these emergency folks to be professionals. It was starting when I was joining, and we had to go through the training, which I think was a lot better than the older smoke eaters. But on the other side of the coin, if you ask too much, these are volunteers, and so now we're being required to do things like because of insurance reasons, we have to become employees of the town. It just becomes very, very difficult to run a club or anything like that when it comes to the amount of time that you have to spend with administrative overhead and training that may or may not be relevant.
Too much regulation in this state?
It's something we should be very careful of.
Again, very carefully worded. You and our first storyteller, Morgan, share in common this position that you've held on the State Board of Trustees. That's pretty cool that you're both, that you've both at different stages of your life and in different ways come to this realization that for both of you, this has been a really important part of your life and your development.
Yeah, and it wasn't an easy task to, suddenly be thrust into the corporate board of a corporation. I mean, it takes you totally by a different dimension than what you're used to from the other perspectives. But I could see from everybody's perspective why they were all frustrated. They all wanted the best for the system, and it's just a tough situation.
Bill, you're our last storyteller, so you get the honor of helping to wrap everything up. And you've heard all of your fellow storytellers practicing and thinking about what they wanted to say tonight and how their stories help illuminate some of the issues that we see in Vermont. From what you've heard, and all five of you have very different stories, but a lot of through lines as well. Are you optimistic about the future of the state? Do you see things happening in these stories of people here that give you hope about who we are and where we're going?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I hear the struggle with our population and aging population, things like that, but I think we have a lot of opportunities if we keep up the fight to keep Vermont, both with the general stores that we need to try to preserve if possible. I know that I try to give a lot back to the traditional ways and learn from the folks, even I'm only going to be a Flatlander once removed, but I would like to learn as much about Vermont as I can. And, I think the most important thing is that we realize going forward, it's really us that make Vermont.
Well, Bill McGrath, thank you very much for being a part of this evening and for sharing your story with us.
Thanks a lot.
Bill's story brings us to a nice conclusion this evening as we think about all of the ways that Vermont experiences the pushes and pulls of the modern world, the need for innovation, but also a connection to the past and to the values that really sustain our sense of self here. We're going to have to figure out as Vermonters which values are worth preserving and which are going to have to adjust, maybe have already adjusted, so that we can have a fair and equitable society for everyone who calls themselves a Vermonter. As we heard tonight from all five of our storytellers, life can be really hard here. But even when it's hard, for many people, and certainly for those on stage tonight, it's still worth staying, digging in, and being a part of the solutions for our communities. I want to thank our brave storytellers for joining us this evening and sharing their lives with us. Please join me in thanking them with your applause.